So tonight's guest is one of Scotland's most renowned DJs, a club pioneer, a label owner, and he's remixed over 100 acts. In 1990, he co-founded the legendary electronic night Pure in Edinburgh, which ran for exactly a decade. And he's also one half of the Optimo duo, which started out as a weekly night in Glasgow and is now a global festival and clubbing phenomenon. Tonight, he should have been in Albania, but instead, he's coming to us from his Glasgow home. So welcome, Keith McIvor, aka JD Twitch. How you doing?
Hi, Olaf. Good to see you. Yeah.
You too. We're using something that's not Zoom for this, so hopefully our viewers will have a better quality audio and visual experience. So, Keith, something that I've never actually asked you before, is despite knowing you all the time, what was the first gig you went to, and what was your, what really sparked your interest in music?
First gig I went to was Blondie at Edinburgh Odeon, which was the 1st of January 1980, which is a pretty good way to start the 80s, I think. And actually, if you want to see the gig, they played Glasgow Apollo Hogmanay the night before, and it's almost identical set, and that is easily available online. So weirdly, I can feel like I can rewatch the concert, even though it's the Glasgow one. So that was my first pop music. The first records I bought were all pop music from listening to the radio at the time. Pop music in the late 70s, early 80s was it was a fantastic time to discover music, I think.
Well, do you remember what your first single actually was?
I think it was probably something like Shawadi Wadi, maybe.
Really? That's quite funny. That was mine as well, weirdly enough.
So we're both terribly uncool. Yeah, I mean, Shawadi Wadi were pretty bad, it has to be said.
I mean, I did buy it with a record token. The first record I actually bought with my own money was Cars by Gary Newman, which was also my first gig.
First I bought with money was a Wombos record. That's just how cool I am. I always remember when people see their first record was the Sex Pistols or something. I'm like, I don't believe you. I don't believe you.
No, I think there's a lot of people of our vintage that probably did splash out on a Shawadi Wadi record before anything else. So you obviously that time there was a lot of I guess we'd call it alternative music around, but by the sort of mid to later 80s, there was obviously in Scotland in particular this boom in successful Scottish pop bands that a lot of them that ended up dominating the charts. But one of the reasons that I wanted to bring you in this week was to paint a different picture of what was going on there as well at that time. And I recall seeing you at a student union, the Potter Row Student Union, which still exists to this day. Back then, it was a bit of a magnet for the city's goths and punks and indie pop stars.
Indeed, it certainly was. And that was a regular hangout Wednesdays and Friday nights. And I guess that was my introduction to hearing music that I liked. And I mean, before that, we all used to go to underage discos, and they were called discos then, where it was really just bad chart music. And then something like Potter Row was my first introduction to hearing music that I loved, played loud amongst people that I felt an affinity with.
And then, you had your first DJ experience round about that time as well, didn't you? I mean, at that point, there were various interesting clubs run by, I guess, what I'd describe as a group of gay punks, and they had this amazingly eclectic taste and brought together actually a really interesting group of people. I mean, there was one night in particular, the back room, which springs to mind. I mean, I believe that's the first place you DJ'd, but I mean, how did that all come together?
Well, the back room was a basement club in the Cowgate, below what was called the Place, and it was right in the cellar. You would get into it from the Cowgate, and myself and my crew of friends used to go there religiously on Saturday nights because it really, really played the music that we couldn't believe a place like this existed that we loved. And then after being going for about a year, I think, no one used to dance for the first hour and a half. Clubs were very different then. So people would come in, they'd sit about, people would get up and dance to a record, sit down, get up. It wasn't like now where people will just stay on the dance floor. So I think Bill and Bobby, the DJs that ran it, who both deserve a lot more credit than they ever get. I think they were just fed up doing the warm-up, and they put a poster up saying that they were looking for people to volunteer to come along and audition to get the job of doing the first couple of hours of the night. And my friend Mackie persuaded me that we should both go along and audition, and neither of us had ever DJed in our lives. I had no inclination to do it whatsoever, but just thought it'd be a fun thing to do. And we went along and miraculously somehow got the gig. I mean, I knew so little that I thought the pitch control which you used to change the speed of the records was the volume control. And it wasn't mixing, it wasn't DJing in the sense that people would think now you were playing a record, then you were playing another record, then you were playing another record. And very soon I found this was something that it was very seductive. I loved doing it. And so if it wasn't for that poster and Mackie persuading me to have a shot with him, maybe I would have never gone down this route.
And I think it's worth giving, extra credit to Bobby and Bill. Bobby sadly passed away recently, and those guys were, along with Fritz and I think Roxy, who would come along to lend moral support, were really groundbreaking in what they were putting on, because there were nights like the back room, which is now a Waterstones in Princess Street, but then was a gig
Island,
with the biggest sound system ever. And I think that around that time there was a really active club scene as well, with the guys like the Leal brothers too. So I mean, I guess you weren't really thinking at that point of setting up your own night, but I mean, how did that come together?
Well, again, it was Bill and Bobby did the first house night in Edinburgh in Fire Island on a Thursday night called Block, and that was my introduction of really falling in love with house music. And then I tried in Glasgow, took a year out from university, thought I'm going to really give this a go and try and see if I can get something started. I did a club night in Glasgow. First night, there was queues around the block. Second night, it was half full. Third night, there was 10 people there. Fourth night, it was all over. So I kind of figured, well, I've given it a shot. And then I went back to university, and then through happenstance, got asked to do this night in Edinburgh called UFO, which was at the venue on Colton Road, which was based around bands. So bands would play, and then after the band, if you'd paid in, you could stay. And there was a club, and myself and Andrew Watson, who became Brainstorm, were the DJs there. We'd never met before we started doing the night. It was put together by this music promotions company called Renegade.
And that's rocking. You and McNaught, isn't it, that were Renegade?
Indeed, who are still very active to this day. With they have the voodoo rooms and War Lighting Company still going to this day.
I think they actually put on the Nirvana gig, the legendary Nirvana gig.
They put on Nirvana in Colton Studios. I mean, I think that was the first time they put on Nirvana, and then they were meant to put Nirvana on at the SEC, which would have been the biggest thing they'd ever done. But then shortly before that, unfortunately, Kurt Cobain topped himself.
Now, I remember UFO because it was interesting at that, right about that point, you were getting news broadcasts of these illegal raves happening in England, and it was a lot of that music we'd become exposed to through these different promoters in Edinburgh. And there was quite a big goth element in those. I remember at least at UFO, quite a lot of gay clubbers, and it was quite a mixed group of people all coming together for this music. But then there were also the people that had clearly seen an illegal rave on the news and thought that they'd have to come sort of baggied up and wave their arms around. But it certainly wasn't really that kind of clientele wasn't in the majority, put it that way.
Yeah, and then there was a lot of football casual. It was a very schizophrenic club because it was the era of like Manchester, which I wasn't particularly a big fan of, but you kind of had to play one of those records, and then you could maybe play 2 techno records. Then you had to play another one of those records, and then maybe you could play some Chicago house record, and I mean, it was so new that no one really was thinking this is like a total schizophrenic mess of music, but it kind of worked, but it wasn't fully what either of us wanted to do. And it actually was a blessing when the club got shut down by a riot of two gangs of football casuals destroying the venue.
So it's an unusual way of of perceiving it, but I guess it did lead to the creation of Pure. And again, that's something where I remember going on the first night, and you introduced this membership. You'd introduced this membership scheme, and we do actually have a photo of someone's membership card that they post. This is Julian Firkins, who I was at university with. I never actually got one because I think I was such a sort of regular at the venue. They just kind of waved me on. It wasn't like there was never any way I was going to get confused with a member of the capital city service with my haircut. In fact, far from it. I think I've usually been more likely to get a kicking off them. So, I mean, the memberships thing did, I think, work to the fact that you actually felt safe in that club, and there wasn't that kind of menace.
It was the only way we could do it, because the police had told us you cannot continue UFO. It's just a recipe for ultra violence in the city, and it was a point when football casuals were kind of running rife, causing all sorts of mayhem. So we approached them with the idea, what do we do? A membership club, we can control who we let in, and it gave us the opportunity to start getting to exactly what we wanted. And it was a case of being in the right place at exactly the right time when the whole kind of rave thing really, really kicked off in Scotland.
So, I mean, was it an overnight success for you?
Pretty much. I mean, I think maybe the first couple of weeks it found its feet, and then, pretty much instantly people were coming from all over Scotland. We used to run coaches from Glasgow. It'd be crazy trying to get 2 coachloads of people coming through at a club night in Edinburgh now. It just probably wouldn't happen, but we used to run coaches. People would come, lots of people came from Fife, from the borders, all over.
And I mean, was there a point where you were like, all right, this is what I do for a living now. I'm going to pack in my economics course at university, or did it just sort of happen by osmosis?
I mean, it completely took over my life. But I think in the back of my head, I always thought this is going to have a finite lifespan, which it didn't. I mean, it went on for 10 years, and I loved every minute. But I did always think this isn't what I'm going to end up doing. But became so immersed in it, the university did go out the window, and I never actually graduated.
And did you? I mean, you obviously brought in a lot of DJs that are now household names, and became already household names in the 90s. I'm thinking of Juan Atkins, Derek May, Richie Houghton. I mean, to name a few of the ones from outside the UK, but then Orbital. God, who else? I mean, the list is.
I think we were the first people ever to bring Jeff Mills for £300 to play. No one knew who he was, and so actually the night that he played, the numbers, usually Pure was always sold out, but the numbers went down because no one had any idea who Jeff Mills was. And then he just completely and utterly annihilated the place and blew everyone's mind that was there. So word of mouth spread, and next time he came, he was already a phenomenon. We were the first people to put on Richie Houghton in Europe. I think we had Aphex Twin play sitting on the stage with a bunch of like broken circuit boards. Yeah, we paid Aphex Twin like £250. What's he get now? 50,000, £100,000, definitely.
Wow. Which one was, you got any favorites? I mean, if you had these guests, would you be sort of shaking a leg yourself, or giving it loud?
Especially in the early days, before it kind of went down a route that wasn't particularly so my thing. Definitely, I mean, I'd be on a dance floor lots. Derek May was a phenomenal every time he played. Richie Houghton, the first times we used to bring this guy Dimitri from Amsterdam, was a huge fan of his. So yeah, I've danced lots and lots, had lots of great memories.
I think Chris actually supplied us with a picture of Derek May in action. They're in black and white, but I think that's the only way that you could actually you could actually take a photo in those under those lighting and dried ice conditions. But I mean,
Stevie Brown behind him, Scottish techno producer. Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay. I think actually there's one of with you and a champagne bottle as well, which I think has got, if I'm not mistaken, Laura Leese behind you. If I think going from that picture, but that's just a shout out to her if she's watching.
Oh, right, I know that's a friend of mine, Sam Hayes. That was I think maybe Pure's 6th birthday or something. So it's a birthday night, hence the champagne.
Now, I think one thing that, obviously goes without saying that, that era in music was certainly assisted for most of the revelers with some, with some chemical assistance. But one of the things that I was really, that really struck me when I was reading a piece done in the Red Bull Academy website was that you're actually straight edge for the duration of the night. And I mean, I wonder what that felt like, because I could only imagine what it's like being straight, trying to play records and just having like hundreds of ecky punters all around me. I mean,
totally insane. I mean, eventually I started drinking just because I couldn't deal with all these people frying my head by talking absolute nonsense. But there was 3 years where I didn't drink, didn't take anything, maybe like a little toke or something. But and then it literally drove me to drink. It was the only way I could deal with especially in the 91, 92, 93, people were so out of their minds. I mean, it was too much, really.
And I mean, that was also the sort of Tap Saf era as well, in the Vicks Vapor Rub, wasn't it?
People would come up and hug you, and they would be covered in Vicks Vapor Rub. It was nasty.
And I mean, obviously, you must have been enjoying it, because you did it for a very long time.
No, don't get me wrong. I absolutely loved every minute of it. It was just when sometimes you'd have the old moment when someone would corner you and go on a mad loop of nonsense. That was the.
Were there any things that you particularly enjoyed about it? Were there any high points? I mean, were there any nights where you were like, that was absolutely amazing, that was a peak experience?
I mean, so many, and to this day, it remains among some of the best audience atmospheres I've ever seen in my life. It was almost too much sometimes. I mean, I remember quite a lot of Detroit DJs would just be freaked out. They'd be like, I wish this audience could just calm down just a little bit. So,
well, I mean, that's an interesting point as well, because I think that a lot of those DJs in those particular days were, playing small places in their own countries, and then coming over to Britain and playing to much bigger audiences in UK clubs.
And I mean, wasted audiences, so they just never experienced anything like it. I remember Jeff Mills once saying he loved coming to Pure because there was this audience and they didn't need to take any substances to appreciate his music, and try to go along with that. When actually, obviously Jeff Mills was a euphemism for pills, which he had no idea of. But it was, making naively as to what was going on with the audience's minds.
And I mean, before moving on to talk about Optimo and the label, I mean, one of the things that I think, here's the venue, by the way. Rest in peace. I think somewhere where I had the privilege of playing the last record in the Cooler when on the closing night. But the whole thing with that particular point, God, I've totally lost my thread. When that picture came up, it distracted me. But before we move on to the Optimo thing, the big myth I think about Pure is that it was just banging techno. Now I remember sort of really, I think something like Sympathy for the Devil being thrown into a DJ set in early days, and Jimi Hendrix.
Also, but yeah, definitely Jimi Hendrix. But we would throw in things like that. But also, it covered all elements of electronic music, from like kind of most psychedelic deep house music to, of course, acid, banging, techno, whatever. But I think the myth in a lot of people's minds is that it was just this banging club, and it certainly wasn't, although it could be.
And I mean, you set up Optimo in 1997. How did that come about?
It came about because some friends of mine were doing Sunday nights in the sub club, and I would play every couple of weeks. And they went on holiday to Barcelona, and they came back from Barcelona and go, "Wow, Barcelona's great. We're moving there." And they did. So the sub club were like, asked me if I would like to take it over. And I'd kind of been mulling over what my perfect night would have been for quite a long time, and kind of went with it. I thought, it's a Sunday night, it's an opportunity to play whatever I want. People have been out all weekend, maybe they'll be more open-minded to not just straight house and techno. And I didn't want to do it myself, so I didn't really know him very well, but I thought Johnny would be a good person to do it with, so invited him along. And we had no expectations. We always thought it was only ever going to be like a lot of our friends who were a bit disillusioned with club. Clubbing was quite boring at that point. Everything had got really brutal and very masculine. We had a lot of gay friends that just didn't like going out to techno and house clubs. So it was more just like a private party for a lot of mates. And then slowly it started to grow. It'd be 100 people, but it was always the sub club that believed it was going to become something with legs. We never really did. And then after about a year and a half, we maybe the busiest night had ever been 120, 150 people. And then just suddenly it exploded. It was 500 people. And it was like that. It was sold out every week until we stopped doing it. So it was
I mean, in those early days, were you I mean, obviously the sub club encouraged you to carry on and stuck with you, which I think is also, commendable in the sense that they would have that vision, that belief to develop.
Had the vision. We did not have the vision. They had the vision. They could see that there was something here, that it was something really fresh and different, and something that was maybe needed at that particular point in time. We couldn't really see that. We were just having a laugh.
Yeah, so that was what I was going to ask. Were you just going in and playing, being pretty much self-indulgent, playing what you fancied playing on that night?
Absolutely, and just catch up a lot of time. I've been so immersed in techno for so long, and I'd always loved all this other music, so it was just a chance to delve into that. I mean, some people hated it. Some people thought it was sacrilege. They'd be like, "How can you play guitar music in the sub club?" And people that knew me from Pure would come and think I'd lost the plot. But I mean, we were having time of our life, like I did my time of my life during Pure. I was having the second time of my life.
And were there any things that you remember playing, that were particularly, I suppose, contrary to what your audiences expected? I mean, obviously, I'm aware of your extremely eclectic tastes, and a lot of the punk stuff and industrial things, and things that I guess you'd expect to jar with an audience turning up for a night of banging techno. But are there any things that you can recall that you messed with people's minds with?
I mean, one that always springs to mind is from the film Deliverance, and it's a track, Dueling
Banjos.
And I can't, but I still play that sometimes. And for the first 2 minutes, people are looking at you like, "What? You've lost the plot." But guaranteed, every time by the end of that, people are going crazy to it. So, I mean, that was it. Everything got very serious at that point. And Optimo was serious. I'm serious about music, but I think there's always room for a moment of lightheartedness and unpretension on a dance floor.
And is that around the time that you started releasing records as well, that you started your first forays into having a label?
Well, during the Pure era, myself and Andy Brainstorm had a label, T&B Vinyl, Twitch and Brainstorm Vinyl. So that was my first foray into running a label, and then we had various sub-labels. And then with Optimo, Johnny and I had a label, a kind of half-hearted effort at running a label, and we maybe would put out a record or two a year. And it was only really one of the reasons why we stopped doing the weekly club, because it was so, it just used up every bit of our energy. It was so much work. We put so much passion and energy into it that it kind of precluded us from doing lots of other activities. We were starting to tour more, and it just felt like it was the right time. So it went. We didn't want it to kind of just dwindle away, but I wanted to really, really focus on properly running a label. So when we stopped doing the weekly night, started up Optimo Music.
Man, I'm actually seeing Nick Roberts saying that he can remember you playing DJ Ötzi in the background at a festival.
I don't know what DJ Ötzi. What's DJ Ötzi?
I wonder if he was on acid at that point and maybe just imagined it. But DJ Ötzi is actually an Austrian pop star. Yeah, you best known here for the hit "Hey Baby." And I
think he's mixing. I mean, he's mixing us up with someone else. I definitely.
I'm glad to clear that up. A bit of pop trivia that DJ Ötzi had his wife induced to give birth on the day he went to #1 in the British charts. So you could say that his child was born the day he went to #1. But yes, moving. I'm
obviously missing out on something. I'm going to get on the.
But what was it like to set up a label? I mean, obviously you've done a lot of compilations, and you know, I guess that's an extension in the sense that you're putting out music that you're really into and that you're really passionate about. But was there a driving force, or that you really got you to allocate that time to putting out other people's music?
I just felt that there was like a gap especially in Glasgow, and there was, Glasgow's always got an abundance of supremely talented people doing music, but at that point, it just felt that there wasn't an outlet for a certain kind of thing. And initially, that was the idea behind the label, that it was all going to be local acts. I think the first 6 or 7 acts were all from Glasgow or from Edinburgh, and then it broadened. Because more music came my way, and through our touring, I would meet more people, come across other artists, but it was originally the idea was it was going to be like a locally focused endeavor.
And it wasn't all electronic either, was it?
No, I mean it's remained like that. It's it's part of it's a dance label, part of it is just if it's music that I like. So there could be a band on it, there could be anything really. It comes down to whether it's something I like would be interested. So there's lots of music I get sent. I think, well, that would probably do very well, but it's not my thing. So, where some labels operate on what is going to sell, I never kind of think of it from that angle. It's just whether it's something that I personally have an attachment to and think I can help promote a little bit.
It's an interesting point, because I remember interviewing Alan McGee years ago, and he said that the things that he did where he was just thinking about the money on creation, the few things that were driven by money were the ones that didn't actually make any money and weren't any successes. So he kind of went back to, going for the stuff that he just felt something for. And
Alan McGee was in the fortunate position of having Oasis, though, so he could do whatever.
Yeah. But I think he genuinely liked them as well. So
absolutely.
To be fair, but it's have there been any success stories with the label? Any things that have done or basically done better than you expected them to do?
I mean, there's one case that is kind of a weird story where something that was probably only ever going to sell a small number of copies ended up doing very well for all the wrong reasons, and it was a compilation of post-punk records from the early 1980s, and I decided that I was going to call it, now that's what I call DIY, do-it-yourself music. And I never really thought that was a brand name. It was felt that it had just gone into common culture. But Sony are very, very protective of that brand name, and they sent me a cease and desist order, and I had to destroy all these sleeves that I printed, and I put it out again in a new sleeve and called the compilation Cease and Desist. But it generated an awful lot of publicity. Everyone wanted to write about it. It was in numerous magazines, and as a result, the compilation sold maybe 4 or 5 times what I would have expected. And I ultimately ended up sending the lawyer at Sony a bouquet of flowers to thank her for all the
Did you get anything? Did you hear back from her at all?
No.
It'd be interesting to find out if she's still there. I think that the head of legal at Sony was, or corporate affairs a while back, was done in some sort of, exposed in some kind of dogging scandal. So I'm not sure she maybe replaced him, but that's another matter.
Cease and desist for libelous talk.
One of the things that I noticed as well is that there's a Brazilian strand has has come through Optimo Music, and I was wondering how that came about.
So I've got two different sub-labels that I run on behalf of other people. I've got a very good friend in Brazil who I met when I was like DJing there, and then he got into promoting, and he's had me out there several times. He's been here to visit and stay with me several times, and he would always play me all these forgotten Brazilian. Brazil has one of the richest music histories of anywhere on the planet. He would play me all this music that he kind of felt deserved to be reissued, but he didn't know how to go about it. So I said, well, why don't we start a label? You can decide everything that gets released, and I'll facilitate it getting out there until a point where you've learned the ropes and you can do it yourself, which has just happened. So now the label's reverted to him, but we did about 8 or 9 Brazilian releases together.
I think we've even got a bit of sleeve art for one of them, but I think that's something that also struck me. I mean, looking at through sort of the releases and actually through a lot of the posters as well. I mean, we'll perhaps bring up some posters from the club nights, but there's a really strong aesthetic that runs through everything. I mean, even right from the early days with the Pure logo to the, I think there's a flyer for a club night that you did called 1992, which was run in 1989, if I'm not mistaken. I mean,
it was,
do you do those designs yourself, or?
No, I'm lucky. I've always had the talent. People, all the Pure stuff was done. I think the 1992 one, I maybe did myself. The Pure stuff was always done by Rock. All the Optimo stuff, Johnny Wilkes, my DJ partner, is a incredibly talented artist in his own right. So he's always done all our own design for the label. I work with this guy Andrew Beltran, and he's super talented, but we often reach out to other artists to take. So there's no this label's like 4AD or Factory where they have a defined aesthetic. Optimo Music does not have a defined aesthetic, and I also try to get as much input from the artist. I've always believed that a record should be the vision of the artist as much as possible.
And have there been any that you've been particularly pleased with, or have there been any where you've had to say, no, I can't print that one?
Never. No, I mean, there's been a few people, maybe their ideas need to just sharpen up a little bit, but no. No one's come up with anything that's too offensive or shocking to release. So yeah, usually it's a long conversation until we get to a point where everyone's happy with the design.
I mean, am I right in thinking Optimo Music as a label actually was launched when recorded music sales were at their lowest ever?
Yeah, probably started at the worst point in the 2000s when I think maybe a year before that was the worst point, and then when we started Optimo Music, it was still pretty low. But I think it's still not great. People think that vinyl sales, for example, exploded. I mean, there was a boost in people getting into vinyl, but it was probably not as much as people think. It's tough. Some records will do very well, some will do terribly. It's really through digital sales that the label survives, especially in the current time that we're going through.
Yeah, well, I noticed as well that you do it over Bandcamp, which our pals at Athens in the North do as well, and this has kind of really risen up to be quite a significant platform. So you've got the digital and the physical combined.
Yeah, I only do digital through Bandcamp, but yeah, it's growing and growing, and I think Bandcamp are one of the few music platforms that I've got a good word to say about. I mean, they're very supportive of artists and do a lot to help.
How do you mentioned that you come across music when you're when you're traveling and through different friends, but how do you make those decisions on what you're gonna put out?
I mean, it really comes down to whether I really love it, but there's a little bit more of that. But so it used to be that it would just be that. If I love this, I want to get it out there. And then sadly, have to maybe be a bit more pragmatic than that. And there's quite a lot of things I would love to put out, but just from experience, I know that I'll really, really struggle to do them justice in sales. I can't afford to do that as much as I would like to. So it really comes down to something that I really love, but I sense that maybe there is an audience for it, and sometimes there isn't, and sometimes there is, and I'm taken by surprise how big an audience there is. It's impossible to predict.
And I mean, where's this music cropping up? I mean, I can remember writing a piece about, or Sync rather. I remember writing a piece about Soma, and one of their releases had ended up in some sort of French S&M film. I wonder if you've had any of your Optimo music releases cropping up in unusual places.
Sadly, nothing that sleazy, but quite a lot of uses in the fashion world for some reason. I think we had a friend that worked in that world, and he had used a lot of things. And then I think in that kind of world, people copy each other. So they're, that Optimo music must be cool because he's used it. So we were quite fortunate. We had one actually just went out for Louis Vuitton. I've not seen it, but no films, a few little bits of TV, but nothing gigantic. Steven Spielberg hasn't come calling yet.
Have you? Did you get any Louis Vuitton merch? I mean, have you got a handbag now, Keith?
No. I think Louis Vuitton have devoted all the resources now, haven't they, to making PPEs? So maybe I can get some Louis Vuitton.
I mean, you've also you've done what, 100 remixes?
Probably more than 100.
More, wow. I mean, and pretty much anyone in Scottish music with Chvrches and Franz Ferdinand, Django Django, Springtime.
Yeah.
I mean, then things like Florence and the Machine. I mean, how did those remixes come about? I mean, what was your first sort of foray into doing mixes for other people?
I mean, people would just ask. It was like, I never set out to be a DJ. I never set out to be a remixer. People would just ask if I wanted to do one and start doing it. And that's kind of how I learned how to do it. I mean, I listened back to some of the early ones and cringe a bit, but it was a process of just trial and error, suss out how to do it. And then people just kept on asking. And I couldn't.
What was the first one that you did?
I mean, the first ones I did were for completely forgotten bands. There was a guy called DJ Chaos from Berlin, and he asked me to do one. Actually, Franz Ferdinand was an early one, and then on that I worked with someone else because I didn't have enough knowledge really on how to do it. And then someone weird, then you would just get a reputation, and then I guess people say, "Oh, that person's someone that mixes loads of bands." So I mean, things like Manic Street Preachers would ask, and it was obviously based on they'd maybe seen a Franz Ferdinand mix or something. And then I just kind of got sick of the whole process because you do these and most of them just disappear out into the ether. And I'd rather spend the time doing my own music now. And I still do the odd ones. If something's really interesting to me, I'll still do it. But whereas I used to do maybe 20 a year, now I maybe do 2 or 3 a year.
And how did the first one come about?
It was just someone that we knew, another DJ, and he had a deal to do an album, and then they wanted to do remixes, and he just thought maybe I would do something interesting because he liked my DJ, and he asked if you got any experience in the studio, and I was like, well, tiny little bit, and I had a few bits and bobs of equipment, so just kind of had a bash, and then it went from there.
Are there any that you're particularly pleased with, or that you are particularly pleased to be asked? I mean, I think there's one that you did off Leather Nun, the song FFA, which we're both rather rather fond of this song. Go and look it up because it's perhaps not something we could air in public, but it is something like that, where this is a song that you've listened to in your youth, and then you
absolutely. You could never imagine that you would end up doing something like that. Another one is I was a huge fan of, and still am, of William Onyeabor, the musician, and then getting to do a remix for him was wow. So sometimes when it's someone that you were like, already in awe. Some of them just feel like it's a jobbing thing, and you're maybe not such a fan of them, and you're just doing it because you like the track, but you're not a huge fan. But when it's someone that you're a mega fan of, that's quite a thrill.
Do you speak to the people when you're the musicians when you're before you do the remixes, or is that less common?
Yeah, very rare. I mean, a few like Sons and Daughters I did, and they were friends of mine, but mostly not. No, mostly it's through their label, and you do it, and then sort of see. You never hear back. You never hear whether they like it or don't, or very rarely.
I mean, the Sons and Daughters one is ace, because I think that, you know, when the odd forays into, you know, DJing as loosely as you could describe it as DJing that I've had, that's always basically meant that you could put it on in a loud boozer or in a club, and actually people can respond to it. So yeah, I mean, I think that's one of my favorites out of the ones that I've heard. And I mean, I guess that, you know, now you're also, as you alluded to, making your own music. I mean, is there anyone you'd like to remix you?
Oh, I don't know. No, I'm not into remixing. If you know, on the label, I've almost no remixes. I'm not really that interested, surprisingly enough, even though I've done all these remixes. Remix culture is not that much of something. There's brilliant remixes, obviously, throughout music history, but no, doesn't really interest me very much.
And I mean, something that occurred to me was that wasn't there a story with the remix? God, I can't remember the details of it, where there was someone else called going under the Optimo name that had remixed something.
So this was right in the very early days of Optimo, and we started to get booked internationally, and there was a series of about 4 gigs that we did, and the promoter, we would be out having dinner with the promoter before the gig, and he would say, you know, I love that remix you guys did, that's why I booked you. And we were like, that wasn't us, because there was a brief point in time where there were 2 Optimos, and there was this guy called Pete Herbert, who's still about and is a friend of ours now, but he was also using the name Optimo, and it caused quite a lot of confusion, and finally we got in touch with each other, and he agreed that we could keep the name, even though we started about the same time, but we were getting all these gigs off the back of his remix. But then he also said that he was getting gigs off the back of someone would have found something, thought they were booking us, but they were booking him. So yeah, it caused a lot of confusion. And now to this day, there's some sort of hip hop act in the United States called Optimo, and sometimes we'll see like the program at a festival we're playing at, and they'll have their photo rather than I mean, it's so obvious. Is this you mentioned the festivals, because you did stop doing Optimo as a weekly night and move to more, you know, one-off events or festival shows. I mean, how did that transition come about? Well, I mean, it was one of the reasons why we stopped doing the weekly night, because we were touring more and more and more, and quite often we would be away Friday, Saturday, and then come back on the Sunday, and just felt that we didn't have the energy to do the Sunday nights, and it needed a lot of energy. And it just, over the years, it grew and grew and grew. I think 2019 was our busiest year ever. Obviously 2020 is now our quietest year ever, but it just became more and more renowned for playing festivals. So we've got boots, and a lot of people don't like festivals. They think nightclubs are where it's at. I like both. I do like playing at festivals mostly.
It's interesting this, because I think that, you know, a lot of people, I guess, in the music industry, and a lot of performers, once they start you know, getting to our vintage, they're less enthusiastic about doing festivals or touring in general. And I wonder what it is that appeals to you about it. I mean, there's something about going to festivals that you enjoy? Do you hang out afterwards? Do you go to check out the places in the area?
I mean, usually you're in and out, or you get a few hours, and you'll check out things at the festival, but usually not in the area. Unless we're going somewhere far flung, we usually don't have very much time. I find them quite a challenge, because quite often you're playing at a festival, the audience doesn't really know who you are. So it's, you know, you've really got to work at it, but it's very satisfying when you can turn this big audience onto what you're doing, and you can sense that it's going really well. And I think because we've done them so much, we kind of know that we're quite good at playing in that environment. Obviously, sometimes it doesn't work, and you have a terrible gig, but it's thrilling.
Are there any tracks that you would use to kind of get the audience going, or are there any staples that
No,
like if you're going into an unknown crowd?
Never know what we're going to do. I'm going to do, and I don't think Johnny does either, until play the first record. Never plan anything out. Never have something staple thing that's going to save it. Just kind of do what we do and freestyle it in the moment. I mean, there's certain tracks that you play that that they're going to work, and maybe that you play quite often, but it's a little bit more freeform than that generally.
And how do you coordinate between the two of you when you're DJing? I mean, do you discuss it beforehand, or is it really just a total feeling?
It's total feeling, and if we're doing a festival, say we get 90 minutes, then maybe we'll play it record about. If it's longer, we'll do half, because we've got different styles of how we play. So we'll do half hour, and then the last bit we'll do together. But it totally depends on the mood and the vibe at the time. And I think that's a very important part of being a performer, is be able to sense even if it's a huge number of people, there is a vibe and an atmosphere, and being able to sense that is quite important. I think I'm quite good at sensing what the overall atmosphere is and maybe what needs to happen.
And am I right in thinking you still take vinyl to go and DJ at festivals?
I do indeed. I use a laptop and vinyl, and then Johnny uses CDJs. And sometimes the setup is terrible and I was thinking earlier, throughout the 90s, it was only vinyl. And I don't remember very many bad setups where the records were jumping, but I'd say now maybe half the time you're playing somewhere and the setup is just not conducive. The records are feeding back or they're jumping. But in a perfect setup, I would probably play 2/3 what I play is vinyl, and then the third is coming off the laptop.
And I mean, are there any places on, clubs that you've played that you've particularly enjoyed? I mean, do you find that the places you like playing are often the ones that aren't necessarily world famous, or that are a bit off the beaten track, or is it more that, the big places, the big names also live up to their reputations as great places to play?
I mean, a lot of them do. A lot of the famous nightclubs, Panorama Bar, whatever, are famous, deservedly so, but also quite often playing off the beaten track, playing smaller cities or cities that have so many clubs is more rewarding, because they're less jaded, they're less spoiled, so they have a little more enthusiasm. And some of our best experiences have been, we played in Rennes in France one time, and the gig just went so well. We had such a rapport with that audience that we ended up having a residency there, and went back another 10 times or so. We still would be going back there if we were able to be touring just now. And so, yeah, I mean, the big places, the famous clubs are great, but also a lot of smaller places are sometimes more rewarding.
There's a great question from Nick Stewart here at Sneaky Pete's, which I'd like to direct people to, that claim that Edinburgh doesn't have a lively club scene anymore. Even I've, in my advancing years have popped into Sneaky's for a dance, and pretty much doubled the age of the average age of the crowd. But they're quite pleased that the DJ was George from Underground Solutions. So at least there's one geezer almost as old as me. But he's asking about what do you do about making listening time when you're listening to demos or working out your set? And do you have hi-fi hour at home, or are you always plugged into a Walkman?
No, I'm not plugged into Walkman, but I mean, my ears are shredded, so I don't tend to ever put headphones in, because a little bit of my hearing that I've got left might get lost. Yeah, I spend a lot of time. I mean, during the week, mostly DJing for us is the weekends. So during the week, I'm at home, I'm working on the label, I'm constantly listening to music, to demos, to finding music for my DJ sets, and then also I have a lot of time where I'm just listening to music that I enjoy listening to, trying not to think about it on a work level.
There's someone else asked me, have you got any advice to someone starting out as a DJ? This is Tony McVeigh. So soul, he does soul funk, or she, I'm not sure, you can't see the picture here. Is soul funk, R&B and hip hop, and they're collecting vinyl at the moment.
I mean, I think for me, the most important thing is to have your own unique voice, even if you're playing the kind of music that lots of other people are playing. Try not to emulate anyone else. Find your own way of doing it that is unique to you. I mean, that's what's worked definitely for me, and I feel is very important. And practice. I mean, I think a lot of people want to DJ, but they are. I mean, I worked for so much time in my bedroom when I first started doing this. I had no idea what I was doing, but there was no YouTube tutorials. I had to suss it out myself. But I think passion and hard work and having your own vision of what you're doing.
Do you think there's an element of self-indulgence that helps as well, that you develop your own, you're putting out your own tastes and selecting things that you're really into? I mean, in the early days of Born to Be Wide, when we invite people to come and DJ, we actually, for the first year, didn't let anyone play records who'd ever DJ'd before. And that was quite a nice way of doing it, because you really got people's personal taste. And I think that's quite hard once people have DJ'd and have had the kind of hit from the audience response. It's quite hard to shake that off. So there's absolutely. I mean, in some ways it destroyed the way I listen to music, because I'm always thinking, how can I fit that and how can I make that work? It sounds just really refreshing to hear someone that isn't a DJ but it gets a chance just to play their favorite music, and they're not overthinking it or trying to do it in a technical way or thinking about flow. They're just simply playing music they love. Oh, seem to have gone black. Oh,
I don't know what that was.
I think you look quite well illuminated to me, or at least the top of your head does. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. So someone has just asked if Johnny's part of Optimo Music, but my understanding that the label's just you these days, isn't it?
So Optimo Music's always just been me, simply because Johnny is a big family guy, and we had a conversation when I wanted to start the label, and I think he decided that it just didn't have, during the week, the time that I would maybe spend running the label, he needs to spend being a dad. So he doesn't have anything to do with the label at all.
Now, we've obviously mentioned Bobby and Bill and Ewan and Rock, and obviously your fellow DJs, but has there been anyone else that's really been around at these decisive moments in your musical career, or any people that have really ended up sending you in a particular direction, or being particular inspirations?
I mean, I can't overstate how much of an inspiration Bill and Bobby, who were the people that gave me my first break, were as DJs. Before that, I'd always just thought a DJ was someone who just played a record, played another record. They kind of show me that there's a talent and a feel, and you can shape the form of how a night goes. They had a real panache and style to the way they did it that I'd never heard before. Bear in mind, this was like they were not mixing records. This was pre a time when people mix records, but still they did it with a great deal of skill. And that's kind of always stuck with me, that how you present and put things together is very important. Something's more important than the technical ability to mix two things together. Programming is key.
And obviously you said you're particularly hit by what's happened with all the festivals being cancelled and clubs and venues being closed. I mean, I guess last year you did something like 100 shows, and to go from that to nothing. I mean, how have you been sort of passing your time? I mean, have you been focusing more on the label, or
mainly been going quietly insane? Well, I had a couple of weeks of that, working on the labels, doing what I can, listening to lots of music, reading, exercising. But it's worrying, because I think anyone in the music business who performs for a living has no idea what the future holds and what it'll end up being like, and whether it'll ever go back to. I mean, in some ways, I hope it doesn't go back to how it was, because there was a lot of things wrong with how it was, and perhaps this is an opportunity to take stock and create a better world for performing musicians and audiences. But it's scary not knowing what the future is, and financially what the future is going to be like.
Are there any things that you'd you'd particularly like to see change? I mean, if coming out of this, what would you like to see different to how it's been?
Well, I mean, I think there was already debates about like lineups and more equitable, and I think we're going through an incredible period right now as we speak, and I think hopefully racism is going to be challenged finally. I mean, maybe that's a utopian viewpoint, but I think lineups quite often, especially at festivals, had got very, very boring and unimaginative and very unrepresentative of the people in our society. So yeah, I hope it gets shaken up a little bit, and it gets less about ego and Instagram posts and showing off, and a little bit more about love and music. But it probably won't.
Yeah, well, I think you've you played a big part in changing attitudes, and even just this week, if people who think that you were ignoring being on here, it's worth me saying it, is that you didn't want to be self-promoting in a week where so many things are happening around the world against racism. So it's another opportunity to mention that this has been free. It's all been organized for free and enjoyed for free, but please do give a donation to Positive Action in Housing, because I think that it's really important to emphasize that Scotland hasn't got any room to be complacent, and certainly things like the Windrush scandal and Serco evicting asylum seekers or failed, in inverted commas, asylum seekers in Glasgow, these things are happening on our doorstep. And I think that having a charity that's actually fighting for people in those situations is great, and I think that it's please donate to them. We put a link on here as well.